Welcome back, everyone, to My Fake Podcast. It's a podcast that's not a podcast because it's on YouTube and nowhere else. Welcome, my friend Isla Morley, for her third installment of our mini-series. Welcome to the show.
Yeah, it's good to be here.
And we are talking about something that is fascinating and interesting, but a little bit button pushy because some people feel more strongly about commercial versus literary fiction. The reason I wanted to talk about literary fiction in particular, and more sort of like a how-to discussion, is because I think there is endless advice online, especially on YouTube, about how to write commercial fiction, but very little advice about how to write literary fiction. So could you possibly break down for the audience what would be the difference between a commercial novel and a literary novel?
Well, I'll do my best.
Okay. It's not easy.
Well, first of all, we hear a lot of the time about the difference between commercial fiction and literary fiction is whether it's plot-driven or not. And I don't get that. I don't subscribe to that. I think that regardless of whether it's literary or commercial, it has to have a really engaging plot because we're storytellers, and people who read stories or engage with stories, listen to stories, they want to move through a story that has a lot of tension. So you can write nice, fancy prose, but if all you have is metaphors, what else you got? Yeah. We're going to put the book aside, and we can list books like that.
Right.
So the other distinction that is helpful for me is really to say, where is the engine of the story located? Mm-hmm. So in commercial fiction, I think that it is located more in the action. But in a literary novel, for sure, it is located inside the character's mind and heart.
Would you say, too, for commercial fiction, the engine is often located in the concept? Because sometimes the pitch can be intriguing and really cool more in a commercial book.
Well, you get concept literary fiction.
True.
That just doesn't go anywhere. And I've written that book that goes nowhere.
So I know the book. Yeah.
So I kind of stay away from concept,
right,
and keep more to the focus of what is a character's inmost desires and fears, and the kind of the memories and the aspirations and the hopes, and use that as the engine to drive the action and to propel the plot forward.
Yeah.
Does that make sense?
Yes, definitely. And I do want to make a distinction for the audience that some people who are more proponents of commercial fiction, they find that the literary folk can be a little snobby or pretentious because it's like, well, it's not literary fiction, it's just commercial fiction. I don't feel that way at all. We all have our preferences in what we want to read. I actually made one of my favorite videos is called Why I Read Depressing Books. And I make that distinction, like most of the books I like to read are kind of depressing. I also said in the video that I really love fun, light books too. I like that quick 3-day read where you just want to know what happens. And so I just want to say that there's no, one is not right, one is not wrong.
Well, I believe that elements of both have to be in both stories.
Absolutely.
Literary fiction really benefits from the aspects of commercial fiction. And if you're going to write a literary novel, to try and get as many of those elements as possible, and to kind of hit that sweet spot.
Yeah. Everyone's looking for the sweet spot right now where it's draws people in, it's page turner, but still deep enough where you feel super connected to the characters. And I think that's what it is for me too. For literary books, I feel a lot more connected to the characters than in commercial fiction.
And I think the thing that connects us with those characters is really what the characters think and feel, right, as opposed to in commercial fiction, maybe you're going to see more about what the characters do and say. Yeah. So it's the feeling aspect that makes us connect with those characters, that makes us relate.
Right.
And really, we all want that opportunity where we can slip into somebody else's skin for a while. I mean, that's pure escapism.
Yes.
To kind of live the inner journey, not just the outer journey.
Yes. And maybe 2 examples just for the audience of like a big commercial novel might be like The Da Vinci Code, right?
Right.
And then like a big famous literary novel that's coming to mind is Life of Pi, something like that. What's maybe a literary novel that comes to your mind that people would know?
Well, Jonathan Franzen's Freedom.
Yes, exactly. And another thing about literary prose is there's a lot more care taken with on the sentence level, right?
Yes, and particularly with metaphor, and paying attention to the lyrical aspect of the line.
Right. So this video is for past me, who is on the hunt for like, hold my hand and please tell me how to write a literary novel. I'm just more interested in literary fiction personally, and I typically watch how-to videos for commercial fiction and try to sort of make it apply to literary, because it does apply, a lot of it. So we have Isla on the show today because she wrote the book The Last Blue. It comes out May 2020. That is this year. And this is literary historical fiction, right?
Right.
And
with a lot of commercial aspects to it.
did you just hit that sweet spot or what? So inevitably, I'm going to ask you that question that most authors sort of maybe roll their eyes at. How long did it take you to write The Last Blue?
So it took me twice as long as what it took me to write my debut novel, Come Sunday. And that was when I was working outside the home as well. And I had a 3-year-old. So I don't know how that happened.
Yeah.
But, now this is my only work that I do. And my 3-year-old is now a senior in high school. And somehow it's taken me twice as long. So it took me 5 years.
Why is that?
A lot of life happened.
Yeah.
Yeah. And I think sometimes when there are family crises or emergencies or life transitions, it's okay to have a novel just take a back seat. And that's what happened. And actually, it turned out that those major life events started to inform some of the story.
Yeah. And that will only come with letting go and being entrusting. We talked about trust earlier before we turn the mics on. That you wouldn't, if you're just forcing it, like, I have to write my book, even though this major life thing is happening, rather than stepping back and looking at how it can affect your writing.
That's right.
When you're writing a literary novel, what is always at your focus?
So I start with the character. Okay. For me, that's where it always begins. It's some kind of engaging character who's in an extraordinary circumstance. So the book before last, a young teenage girl is abducted by a survivalist, and she's kept in this abandoned missile silo. And in this case, it's a woman with blue skin who's lived banished her whole life for her own protection deep in the Appalachian wilderness. And she has to stay hidden to protect herself. All that changes when a photographer from Cincinnati comes along and he's looking for a scoop, to salvage his career. So that the character is the main focus for me. And I don't think that this character necessarily has to be so extraordinary herself. She can be relatable, that helps, but I don't think that this character is going to be interchangeable with any other character. There has to be certain aspects about this character that make her unique, and we're going to see those aspects develop and change as the arc of the story continues.
So as you're drafting, as you're working on draft after draft, how do you develop a complex character? I think this is a really difficult question, and I wouldn't hold it against you if you don't have a canned sort of succinct answer, but I really struggle with that, coming up with this character out of thin air and then making her feel so real to the reader. How do you do that?
I think complexity. I think you've got to work on a character that has really great qualities, relatable qualities, but then also things about her that are not likable or undeveloped or are contrast. If you think about art, the negative space is just as important. So to develop the negative space around certain aspects of a character, and a lot of that goes as you write. Certainly for all of my novels, you kind of get to know your characters more and more as the story develops, as the plot unfolds. I think the most important thing to do is really to stay focused on that character's feelings. And if you can kind of keep tapping into the feelings, you'll get access into all the complexity that will create for a more engaging, rounded character.
So you have these two rich main characters, but then they aren't the only people in the story. How are you going to make the supporting characters just as complex?
So the supporting characters are really part of that negative space sometimes, because they bring out aspects of your main characters that you want to see. But to have those secondary characters be complex as well. And in the early stages, when I was still fleshing out this novel, some of the secondary characters were one-dimensional. So I was getting feedback a lot about that. And I just had to stay away from the easy way, the good character, bad character, good guy, bad guy scenario. And that took several revisions to do, where I could get to these secondary characters that were really flawed and that didn't evoke our sympathy. And you could see their goodness in that as well. So that just creates more layers and more nuances in the characters that then will kind of create organically a more layered plot.
Yeah, and I saw this a lot with Sarah, I think her name's Sarah, the preacher's daughter, in the story, where I didn't know how I felt about her until maybe 3/4 of the way into the book, because I wasn't sure if she had ulterior motives or what her whole inner life was like.
And that's an example of some character that was really, really minor in the early drafts. And then she had to come to the foreground more and more, and not just telling her own story, but really she was integral to kind of informing how the main characters were going to make their choices.
So let's talk briefly, and we could probably make a whole conversation about this, but about plotting versus pantsing, which is the term people, discovery writing, flying by the seat of your pants is what people call it. Are you a plotter or are you a discovery writer?
Discovery, for sure.
Yeah. Can you explain that process a little bit?
Well, let me say that the novel that lives in my drawer, it was the second novel that I wrote, that it was just such a great concept for a structure, and I had plotted everything out. And the problem was that I never discovered anything when I was writing. I was always writing to this goal, to this discovery that I'd already cooked up. Whereas when I write all my other books, if I can just go to that feeling level of the main character and let that drive everything, things unfold that then are surprising to me. And I think the best way to kind of have a discovery or surprise for a reader is if the writer herself experiences that moment of surprise.
Yeah.
And I've done things, I don't know if you've done this, where something is so surprising and kind of such a stunner that after I've written a scene, I'll just say, oh no, that can't happen. And I'll go and rewrite it the way that
it's supposed to happen.
Think, yes. And and that's happened where I've had to actually go back again and go to the original thing that presented. So, but I do know that people write according to plots.
Yeah.
For me, the engaging part of writing a story is to find out what happens. You know, we've got to sit at a desk every single day.
Yeah. It better be an interesting.
It's got to be an adventure.
Yeah.
Otherwise, why do it?
Right. Yeah. And I know people write successfully with plotting all the time. And some of my favorite books, I'm sure they were plotted. But I've done that before. My first book was plotted and it was bad. It was just, I mean, there were some moments, but it wasn't that exciting to write.
I think if you plot, well, my temptation is so that I know that it's going to amount to something. I want that kind of assurance before I embark on such a huge undertaking.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, you've said before that you don't know if you have a book until a year later.
Right. And you can outline something and plot something in, a couple of weeks.
Yeah. But maybe you still won't know if it's good enough, right?
That's right.
We're going to talk about this in a future video about the blocks. I think I'm just feeling like rather cynical about writing right now. So this conversation is maybe I'm coming off as jaded, but I think it's like I hear you. It's because my writing's not going well. And the book I'm working on it's bad. It's just so bad right now. But it's like you have to develop your characters, Hannah. But how do you do that? See what I mean?
Well, I think I need to be your therapist for a moment. This whole thing about being bad, there's that voice in our head that just keeps insisting that we're bad, that we're not the right person to write the story, that it's going to be stupid, that other people are going to read it and they're going to see right through us, that we have no business doing that. And all writing is bad in the beginning. Yeah. And a lot of it during the middle. And there were parts of my book that were bad right on the tail end. So I think we have to kind of coach ourselves away from speaking about when we go for a ride on a bicycle. We're not going to say to ourselves, oh, this is a really wonderful bike ride. Look how well I'm cycling.
Right.
No. So let's stay away from that.
Right. We're just enjoying the ride.
Why can't it be that?
Right.
Why can't it be, oh, look, I'm cycling into a ditch.
Yeah. How fun.
Look at my wipeout.
Yeah. Yeah. I think when it comes to, I think plotting feels like you have more control and it feels like I'm going to be able to force this book out. But when you're discovery writing, like the way that you and I write, especially like by hand, it's full on just, where is this going to take me? And inevitably there's going to be those voices.
I think for me, a good image is, again, with art. Like you have a subject that's for whatever reason engaging, and you're going to start the whole process of making a beautiful painting just by sketching. And so much of our process is just sketching and then defining the subject more and more of the background and getting the dimensions right. It's just sketching. And there's no place for evaluating whether this is good or bad. You can do that way, way down the line. And even still, there's those places of weakness are really opportunities for you to bring something rich to the foreground.
Yeah. Thank you, Isla, for coming on to My Fake Podcast and talking to us about literary versus commercial. Let us know in the comments if you have any questions or any comments about that. Isla Morley wrote The Last Blue, coming out in May, which is about a woman with blue skin who was banished in the Appalachian Mountains, hiding from others until a photographer, comes and discovers her, trying to find a story to save his career. If you want to pre-order the book and support Isla, you can click the link below. And my camera just went off, and we are going to end right now, and the cat is scratching. Thank you for coming. That's it. To pre-order the link, pre-order the book. Pre-order the link. You can't pre-order a link. God. Okay, but I got that pretty good.
It was so good.
I know.